In this video, we're going to see the effects, harmful effects of the products of incomplete combustion. Actually, we want to minimize incomplete combustion as far as possible. So, products of incomplete combustion include carbon which is soot and which is black. So, carbon is a black solid, fine particles. So it consists of very fine particles, and these particles can be breathed in. So when these particles go into the lungs, they can cause irritation and they can cause respiratory difficulties. So when you breathe in carbon, normally it can deposit in the air passages, so you can have the fine particles of carbon that can deposit to cause irritation, or it could also deposit inside the air sacs, and when it deposits in the air sacs, it can prevent breathing, so there's going to be less oxygen that is going to reach throughout the body, which is going to lead to dizziness, lightheadedness, fatigue. So these are what carbon can cause. Normally, carbon, when it's found in its elemental state, which means that if you have a big piece of carbon, for example, your lead pencil contains carbon. This carbon is not it's not really toxic to human beings, but when carbon is found as fine particles, what we refer as soot, so from the exhaust of vehicles, so these tiny particles from the exhaust gases from vehicles, if you breathe that in, if these black particles are breathed in, it could cause breathing difficulties. So these are the two symptoms that human beings will experience if they breathe in carbon or soot. The second product of incomplete combustion that we will look at is carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is also known as a silent killer. So, carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, and because of this it's known as a silent killer, because if in a room there is going to be carbon monoxide, no one will know that there is carbon monoxide in that room unless there is death, so unless someone dies after being unconscious. So why is carbon monoxide so toxic? So usually, let's say that this is our red blood cell, okay? So normally what happens in our red blood cell, we have hemoglobin. So the molecule here, this thing here, that's hemoglobin. So what happens is that oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin, okay? So oxygen over here will combine with hemoglobin and will form oxyhemoglobin. Okay, now when the red blood cell reaches one of our muscle cells, so our muscles are working, so muscles need oxygen, so the oxygen is going to go out of the cell, and the carbon dioxide from the muscle is going to go into the hemoglobin. The carbon dioxide then is going to form carboxyhemoglobin, which is, so together, carbon dioxide and hemoglobin together, they form a compound called carboxyhemoglobin. Oxygen with hemoglobin form oxyhemoglobin. So what happens is that this reaction is a reversible reaction, which means that oxygen binds to hemoglobin, binds into hemoglobin, and binds out of hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide binds into hemoglobin and binds out of hemoglobin when needed by the cell. So this is what happens normally. But if there is carbon monoxide in the air and you're breathing it in, what happens is that carbon dioxide is going to bind to the hemoglobin permanently. So once it binds, it does not get out of the red blood cell, which means that the red blood cell is kind of hijacked and cannot carry out its function of transporting oxygen. So the oxygen cannot bind to the hemoglobin, neither oxygen nor carbon dioxide. So nothing can bind to the hemoglobin now. So what happens is that our red blood cells become useless. So gradually the tissue cells, the muscle cells are deprived from oxygen, and when cells do not get oxygen, they cannot function. And when brain cells don't get enough oxygen, so this is when you have dizziness, headache, and loss of consciousness. And if the effects of carbon monoxide persist, if the amount of carbon monoxide is high enough, it can cause death. Now, the only way to heal from carbon monoxide poisoning, of course, before death occurs, is to supply the person with oxygen for a long period of time. So once enough oxygen is supplied, gradually it's going to help the few hemoglobin cells to send the oxygen to the to the other tissues, to the muscles and the tissues in the body. So carbon monoxide will eventually get out of the hemoglobin, but it takes a very long time. So it can take like around 5 hours to reduce the amount of carbon monoxide in the body by half. So after 5 hours, only half of the carbon monoxide is going to leave the hemoglobin. So it could take a lot of time for a body to recover from carbon monoxide poisoning. The next gas which is produced, next product from incomplete combustion is carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is not that dangerous, but if there is exposure to too much carbon dioxide, it can cause headache and dizziness, because so if there's too much carbon dioxide in the body, which means that not enough oxygen is reaching the cells and the tissue, so it will cause headache and dizziness. But it's not really toxic unless it's found in extremely large amounts. But from incomplete combustion, it's not really going to cause death. So carbon dioxide has mostly is going to affect the environment in terms of global warming, because it is a greenhouse gas. So too much of carbon dioxide from burning of fossil fuels is going to cause global warming. Temperature of the earth is going to rise. So we've seen that. And water vapor actually is not harmful, so that is just going to be liberated into the atmosphere. Okay, so these are the effects of the products of combustion. So make sure you have this in your copybook. So talking about soot, carbon monoxide, which is very important, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. So make sure you have that in your copybook.